I believe strongly that my audience, you ever notice how people only understand your worth once you stop giving them pieces of your soul? It's crazy how they took your love, your loyalty, your time like it was guaranteed. Like you were supposed to stay no matter how heavy it got. But the moment you step back, the moment you chose your peace over their chaos, that's when the truth hit them. That's when the silence started speaking louder than every word you ever said. See, you ain't walking away because you're weak. You're walking away because you finally remembered who you are. You finally realized your heart is a gift, not a shelter for people who show up only when it rains. And trust me, people always regret losing the kind of energy that lifted them, understood them, and stood by them when nobody else did. They regret it when the late night demons show up, when they scroll through old memories, when they look for you in people who don't carry your fire. But listen, just because they regret it doesn't mean you go back. You're not a rewind button. You're not a second chance waiting on standby. Your growth, your elevation, the lesson they were too blind to learn the first time. So let them feel the loss. Let them sit with the emptiness they created. Your journey ain't behind you, it's ahead. And the moment you refuse to return to what broke you, that's the moment you step into the life you were meant to live. Your value doesn't disappear just because someone else failed to see it, and this truth is one of the hardest lessons to embrace when you're hurting. When someone you cared for walks away or treats you like you're replaceable, the first instinct is to question yourself. You start wondering what you lacked, what you could have changed, or why you weren't enough for them to stay. But the truth is, their inability to recognize your worth is not a reflection of your character, your heart, or your strength. It's a reflection of their vision. Some people are simply not equipped to appreciate a rare soul. They don't have the emotional maturity, the life experience, or the depth required to value someone who brings real authenticity, loyalty, and love in a world full of surface level interactions and temporary feelings. A heart like yours is uncommon. And because of that, not everyone you meet will know how to honor it. When you give someone consistency, support, and genuine care, you are giving them something not easily found. But when they take that for granted, you must remind yourself that it does not make you any less valuable. Think about a diamond day. If someone tosses it aside because they mistake it for a stone, the diamond doesn't lose its worth. It simply means the person didn't know what they were holding. Your value has always existed independent of their awareness. You were worthy even when they didn't treat you that way. You were special even when they acted like you were ordinary. Their failure to see your light doesn't dim it. It only exposes the limits of their perception. People often project their insecurities, fears, or emotional wounds onto others. Sometimes they push away the very person who could have helped them grow because facing real love requires vulnerability, and not everyone is ready for that. Some run from authenticity because they're more comfortable with temporary connections. Others sabotage meaningful relationships because they haven't healed what broke them in the first place. But none of this is your fault. You cannot force someone to recognize your worth when they're determined to ignore it. You cannot love someone into clarity. You cannot shrink yourself to fit into the small space of someone else's limited understanding. Your value is not negotiable just because their perspective is narrow. One day, they may look back and realize what they lost. They may compare every future person to you and wonder why nobody makes them feel the same way. They may replay old conversations, remember your kindness, your patience, your loyalty, and realize they misjudged you. But their regret, no matter how deep, cannot define you. It cannot change who you are or what you deserve. Regret belongs to them, not to you. Your responsibility is to remember that your worth comes from within, from your heart, from your character, from the love you give, and from the strength you carry. Other people's inability to appreciate you is not your burden to hold. The only thing you need to hold on to is the truth that you were valuable before they came into your life, and you will remain valuable long after they are gone. Walking away is not a sign of weakness. It is one of the purest forms of self-respect, and it takes more courage than people realize. Anyone can stay in situations that hurt them, drain them, or disrespect them, But it takes real strength to step away from what you once wanted because you finally understand what you deserve. Walking away doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean your feelings were fake or your loyalty was temporary. It simply means you reached a point where protecting your peace became more important than holding on to someone who couldn't see your value. It means you made a choice to stop begging for love that should have been freely given. It means you chose your own heart when someone else chose to take advantage of it. Too often, people assume that staying is the brave thing to do, but staying in a place that breaks you is easy. You're just choosing the familiar pain. Leaving is hard because it forces you to confront uncertainty, loneliness. I believe the fear of letting go, but nothing grows in a space where you are constantly overlooked or mistreated. Walking away is the moment you say, I matter too. My feelings matter, my time matters, my worth matters. It is the moment you recognize that your peace is not something you should sacrifice just to keep someone else comfortable. It is you reclaiming your power, your dignity, and your voice. Many people may try to guilt you for walking away, especially when they benefited from your presence. They will say you changed, that you gave up too soon, that you didn't fight hard enough. But they were never the ones carrying the weight you carried. They didn't feel the exhaustion of giving more than you received. They didn't understand the emotional cost of staying in a situation where you were constantly questioning yourself. Walking away is not about quitting. It is about choosing yourself after being neglected, misunderstood, or taken for granted for too long. There is something deeply empowering about realizing you don't have to stay in places that shrink you. You are allowed to leave when love turns into pain, when support turns into silence, or when loyalty becomes a one-way road. You are allowed to walk away from people who make you doubt your worth. You are allowed to choose healing over chaos. You are allowed to protect your spirit, even if it disappoints someone else. Your emotional well-being is not something you owe to anyone. You don't have to justify your decision to people who never lived your experience. And the truth is, walking away often teaches the other person what your presence truly meant. When they no longer have access to your energy, your patience, your comfort, or your support, they start to feel the loss they didn't expect. They start to understand the value they took for granted. They start to see that not everyone will love them the way you did. But you don't walk away to make them regret it. You walk away because you refuse to keep breaking yourself to keep someone else whole. Walking away is choosing strength over fear, self-worth over attachment, and growth over stagnation. It is one of the greatest acts of self-love you will ever give yourself. People don't often realize what they had until it's gone. And this truth becomes painfully clear when someone finally understands the kind of energy you brought into their life. When you were there, giving your heart. Your time, your loyalty, they treated it like something ordinary. They became comfortable with your presence, with your support, with the way you always showed up no matter what. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't understand, was that the way you loved, the way you cared, the way you stayed even when things were difficult was rare. Not everyone loves with authenticity. Not everyone carries a spirit that lifts others up. Not everyone has the strength to give without expecting anything in return. That kind of energy is uncommon, and most people only recognize its value once it no longer surrounds them. When you leave, a shift happens. Suddenly, the silence you leave behind echoes louder than all the effort you once gave. They start noticing small things at first, the lack of your encouragement, the absence of your late night reassurance, the calm that came from knowing you were always in their corner. They start comparing how they felt with you to how they feel without you. They look for that same warmth in other people, but it's not there. They try to replace you with distractions, conversations, or temporary comfort. But the truth always comes back to them. You were different. You were steady. You were the one who brought peace into their storms. And when that kind of presence disappears, it leaves a mark. People regret losing you because they realize that finding someone who understands without judgment, who listens without impatience, and who loves without conditions is not something that comes around often. They realize it when they meet people who only offer half-hearted interest or shallow affection. They realize it when they speak to someone new and feel the emptiness where your connection used to be. They realize it when life gets heavy and the person they took for granted is no longer there to support them. Regret comes in waves, sometimes slow, sometimes overwhelming, but it always hits eventually when the connection was real and meaningful. But their regret is not your responsibility. It is not your job to sit around waiting for them to wake up to your worth. Their understanding of who you were should not decide how you see yourself. People regret losing you because they finally see what you were offering all along. They see the way you cared even when you were hurting. They see how patient you were when they were inconsistent. They see how deeply you felt when they were careless with your emotions. And when they can no longer access that energy, they start to understand the magnitude of the loss. What they feel later is simply the truth catching up to them. You were a blessing they didn't recognize. You were a safe place they didn't honor. You were the comfort they misinterpreted as convenience. And while they are left with regret, you are meant to move forward. Their realization does not mean you should return or reopen old wounds. It simply confirms what you should have known from the beginning. The energy you brought was rare, powerful, and unforgettable. If someone couldn't see that while you were giving it, then losing you is the lesson they were destined to learn. Healing is not about going back to what broke you. It's about rising into a stronger, wiser, and more grounded version of yourself. When someone hurts you, betrays your trust, or treats your heart like it's replaceable, the wound they leave behind doesn't heal by returning to the same environment that caused the pain. Healing requires distance, clarity, and the courage to accept that you deserve more than broken promises and temporary affection. It means recognizing that growth doesn't live in the past. It lives in the choices you make today. Healing is choosing to move forward even when the familiar calls you back. It's choosing peace over chaos, self-respect over longing, and purpose over nostalgia. When you heal, you start to see things differently. The moments that once blinded you with emotion begin to make sense. You look back and realize that the way you were treated was not love, even if it felt like it in the moment. You start to understand that your attachment wasn't a reflection of their worth, but of your capacity to care deeply. Healing teaches you that your heart may have been loyal, but loyalty does not mean staying where you aren't valued. You begin to separate what you wanted from what was real. You see the patterns you tolerated, the disrespect you excused, and the pain you hid just to keep the connection alive. And that honesty is not meant to break you, it's meant to free you. Healing is also about learning to love yourself in ways you never did before. It's about giving yourself the attention you once poured into someone else. It's about rebuilding the parts of you that were neglected because you were too busy trying to hold someone else together. When you heal, you start choosing yourself without feeling guilty. You start honoring your boundaries, protecting your peace, and believing that you are worthy of a love that doesn't make you question your place. You start prioritizing your mental and emotional well-being, and that shift alone changes everything. You no longer accept the bare minimum. You no longer chase what doesn't nourish your soul. You no longer let temporary people hold permanent space in your life. Healing is not easy. It requires facing uncomfortable truths, letting go of illusions, and accepting that some relationships end because they were never meant to grow with you. But every step you take is a step forward, even the painful ones. And with time, you realize that healing didn't just help you forget the hurt. It helped you discover parts of yourself you lost along the way. It helped you reconnect with your strength, your purpose, and your identity. Healing becomes the bridge between who you were and who you're becoming. People often assume going back to someone familiar will bring comfort, but the truth is that returning to what broke you only delays your progress. The pain doesn't disappear, it repeats itself. The wounds don't close, they deepen. But when you choose to heal, truly heal, you create a new path. You break the cycle. You evolve. You learn that your future is bigger than your heartbreak, and your worth is greater than any rejection or loss you experienced. Healing is not about returning to an old chapter. It's about writing a new one. It's about stepping into a version of yourself that is wiser, stronger, and no longer willing to settle for anything less than what you truly deserve. Your absence has a power that your presence could never reveal. And this is one of the most overlooked truths in relationships. When you are present, when you are giving, loving, supporting, and showing up for someone, they get used to that energy. They start seeing it as normal, as something expected, as something guaranteed. Your presence becomes part of their everyday life, woven into their comfort routines and emotions. But people often take for granted what feels familiar, and they stop noticing the effort behind it. They stop appreciating the patience, the loyalty, the empathy, and the stability you brought. They stop realizing how much of yourself you invested because in their mind you would always be there. But when you finally step away, when the space you once filled becomes empty, that's when the truth hits them. That's when they start to understand what your presence truly meant. Absence has a way of revealing everything your presence kept hidden. The conversations that once came easily become silent. The comfort they felt from knowing you were one call away disappears. The emotional support they relied on suddenly vanishes. Every moment they expected you to show up becomes a reminder that you are not there anymore. They feel the difference not because you stopped caring, but because they never learned how to appreciate you when you were near. Your absence forces them to confront the reality they ignored. You were not ordinary. You were not replaceable. You were not just another person passing through their life. You brought a kind of love, stability, and authenticity that they may not encounter again. In your absence, they begin to replay memories, rethink conversations, and revisit moments where they could have treated you better. They start noticing the small details you used to handle without being asked. They realize that the peace they once felt wasn't because life was calm, it was because your presence made it feel that way. They start to recognize that the emotional balance they had wasn't their own strength, it was the energy you brought into their life. Absence is a teacher, and it teaches with a harsh but necessary clarity. It shows them what your presence protected them from, what it gave them, and how deeply it shaped their life. Your absence also shifts your own perspective. It frees you from the emotional fog that comes from constant giving. You start to see how much of yourself you sacrifice just to keep the connection alive. You begin to realize how exhausted you were from carrying more than your share. You understand that the strength it took to leave was also the strength needed to finally heal. Absence helps you reconnect with yourself, rediscover your worth, and rebuild the confidence that may have been slowly fading. It gives you room to breathe, to grow, and to remember that you deserve someone who values you in both presence and absence. The truth is, your absence allows them to feel the weight of their choices. It forces them to face the consequences of taking you for granted. But none of this is about revenge or proving a point. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back and let life teach them what you tried to communicate with your actions. Your presence was a blessing they didn't respect, but your absence becomes the lesson they can't ignore. And while they are learning, you are rising, moving forward, and stepping into a future where your heart is valued, your love is honored, and your presence is never taken for granted again. Never return to a place that tried to dim your light, because doing so only invites the cycle of pain to repeat itself. When someone fails to recognize your worth, disrespects your boundaries, or undermines your spirit, it leaves a mark that goes deeper than temporary hurt. That mark is a reminder that certain spaces and certain people are not meant to hold your energy, your love, or your light. Returning to them might feel comforting because it's familiar, because you remember the good times, because you hope things will be different. But hope alone cannot fix patterns that were established over time. Returning to the same environment is not a sign of strength. It is a surrender of the self, respect you fought so hard to reclaim. Every time you give in to the pull of familiarity, you risk losing a piece of yourself that you worked so hard to protect. When someone tried to dim your light, it means they couldn't handle the brightness you carried. They felt threatened by your authenticity, intimidated by your confidence, or indifferent to the uniqueness you offered. People who diminish others often operate from fear, insecurity, or ignorance, And no amount of explanation or justification can change that. Your energy, your ambition, your voice, and your joy were never the problem. Their inability to appreciate you was. Returning to that same environment suggests that their limitations somehow define your value, and that is a dangerous lie to accept. Your light is not meant to be hidden or watered down to make someone else comfortable. It is meant to shine unapologetically, and anyone who tries to suppress it was never meant to walk beside you on your journey. There's a clarity that comes from walking away and refusing to go back. You begin to see the patterns that were invisible when you were too close, the repeated neglect, the small betrayals, and the lack of appreciation. You recognize that your absence was not punishment, it was protection. Protecting your energy is not selfish, it is necessary. You learn to surround yourself with spaces and people who nurture your spirit, who celebrate your growth, and who amplify your light rather than dim it. Every choice to stay away from places that try to break you is a choice to honor yourself, to honor your journey, and to honor the strength it took to get here. Not returning also reinforces the lesson that self-worth is not negotiable. It teaches you that love, respect, and appreciation are not optional gifts you should settle for. They are the baseline of any healthy connection. Returning to someone or somewhere that once diminished you only risks repeating the pain, confusion, and disappointment that once held you down. True growth happens when you break free from cycles that no longer serve you and step into environments that align with your values, your potential, and your sense of purpose. Every decision to move forward rather than back is an assertion that your light cannot be tamed, that your worth cannot be questioned, and that your life is too valuable to waste on what tried to diminish it. Refusing to return is also an act of empowerment that teaches others the consequences of taking you for granted. When you walk away and do not come back, it forces people to reckon with the reality that your presence is rare and that it was never theirs to control. Your absence becomes a reflection of your boundaries, your self-respect, and the standards you uphold for your life. They may realize too late what they lost, and while their regret cannot undo the past, it affirms the wisdom of your choice. Walking away and not returning is not just a refusal to relive pain. It is a declaration that your journey, your growth, and your light are sacred, untouchable, and deserving of reverence.